Smart policy or a world less safe? This weekend, major developments out of Iran. 4 U.S. hostages were traded for 7 Iranians imprisoned for violating American trade sanctions. 3 of the Americans are now in Germany. 1 chose to remain in Iran. This was one of them, Jason Rizan, after reuniting with his family. And here's Amir Hekmati, reunited with his family after 4.5 years. On the same day as the trade, the United States lifted banking, steel, shipping, and other sanctions on Iran. The president's hailing it as a major victory.
This is a good day, because once again we're seeing what's possible with strong American diplomacy. Ensuring the security of the United States and the safety of our people demands a smart, patient, and disciplined approach to the world.
But less than 24 hours after those sanctions were lifted, the U.S. imposed new, minor sanctions over Iran's ballistic missile program. Some say the move was delayed by weeks, not to endanger the swap. But this morning, Secretary of State John Kerry denied that charge.
These tracks were separate. We almost had these folks out several months ago. And then there was a snag that occurred.
But the timing, Mr. Secretary, looks a little suspicious. You know,
well, what can I say? We were not going to waste any time in getting them home.
So it's just a coincidence?
It is absolutely a coincidence.
So, Eric, I suppose that can happen, that it would be just a coincidence that you would get the sanctions lifted right after the sailors were caught and were captured and then released, and then, I mean, I'm glad that the Americans are home, but the timing does seem a little suspicious.
Thrilled that they're home, but again, here's what, if you interpret what Secretary Kerry was saying there was, we were going to do whatever it took not to get the sailors home or not to get the hostages home, the 5 that we got back, but to get the deal done. They were going to get that deal done no matter what. And the Iranians were smart, and where if there was a negotiation to get those 5 people back, or even the sailors on the boat from last week, they were going to hold that off until the sanctions were actually lifted and they freed up the banking. Now, the banking numbers that everyone's talking about, it's $100 billion of their money with interest minus what they owed. It's going to come around to be somewhere around $60 billion. But they were going to get that first before they were going to, release these 5 hostages, the people that they've been holding for years, or B, let the sailors go. So they played this smart, but again, you can never trust the Iranians. Just because they did that doesn't mean for the next 15 years we're going to trust them, and I wouldn't trust them next week.
One thing we were talking about in the green room, Gutfeld, was about the fact that the Americans that were being held had done nothing wrong.
Yeah.
They were basically hostages. The Iranians that were being held here in America had actually violated laws.
Well, for countries like Iran, Western prisoners are like the greatest gift card. You can hold on to it for as long as you want, and it's worth billions. So it's hard to be 100% ecstatic about this release because you know it's the fruits of a kidnapping. And about the timing thing, and Kerry says that the process wasn't coordinated. That was more coordinated than Michael Jordan in his prime. The whole thing was planned out. And this whole idea that somehow we're fostering this new diplomatic relationship, if anything, it's an abusive relationship. I mean, imagine, Juan, if you had a friend that you hung out with, and then when you went home, he goes to the streets and starts yelling, "Death to Juan Williams, death to Juan Williams." That's Iran. Iran says they are engaging in this new world, but then this new world relationship, and then next thing you know, they're preaching our demise.
This is actually, I'll let you respond to that one. So even after they signed the nuclear agreement, Iran did not abandon its aspirations for a nuclear weapon, and it also said that this was done by warmongers, Zionists, and the hardliners in Congress are the only ones who aren't happy.
Right. That's what President Rouhani said. Death to me. I guess I'm opposed, Gregory. But I would say that there are separate items here that demand attention. I don't think it was Michael Jordan coordinated. I do think what was coordinated, getting back to what you're talking about, Eric, was the sanctions against the Iranians firing missiles recently. I think the administration held off on that because they were trying to make sure that those people who were being held could get out of town before the additional sanctions were put in place. They're really minor sanctions against specific individuals, not the whole country of Iran. Right. Nowhere near the magnitude of the larger sanctions that are being lifted in order to get, and this is the big point, to get Iran away from a nuclear weapon. Because if you don't trust them, and nobody says they trust them, you don't want them to have the bomb. And don't forget, they hate Israel. We have an interest in Israel's safety. So this is a good thing.
So we're actually being held hostage.
No, you're not being held
No,
hostage. We're being negotiated.
We have to negotiate to get the bomb out of the hands of the terrorist nation. They're saying, if you don't do this, we're going to have the bomb.
Can I also point something out? In this deal, somewhere around 80% of their enriched uranium leaves the country of Iran.
To Russia.
To Russia. That's the point.
It's so comforting.
Russia, yeah. If you want 80% of the available enriched uranium to go somewhere, how about going to a disinterested party, going somewhere else?
But
you don't
Russia
think
has
Russia?
nuke.
I know, but you don't think Russia is disinterested in all this, do you? Do you think?
No, but I think they have.
Do you think Russia's closer? Russia would rather benefit Iran or the United States, given what's going on?
Especially because of their connection with Syria. Kimberly, I want to get your take on something before we turn to politics, because as you can imagine, we are in an election year, and so there were comments by Republican candidates about it. But before we do that, I want to get to this soundbite from Bob Levenson's wife. He was taken in 2007. He was not included in this release, and his wife commented on that today.
I actually had to turn on the TV to find out what was going on, which was really disappointing. And I felt very betrayed and devastated that I hadn't even received a phone call to let me know this was happening, because we had been promised that when the other people were released, Bob would be with him, and he was not.
You felt betrayed by
the United States government for not getting him out.
By the President and the Secretary of State.
Yes.
So she very calmly was explaining the situation. Now, Iran, Kimberly, says that they do not know where Levenson is.
Well, this is when this news broke. This is one of the first people that I was waiting for the name to come through and reading the wires, getting the information, the intelligence reports. And can you imagine how she felt, having to look to the television to try to get some truth and honesty, to find out about the fate of her husband? It's very disturbing. You know, this is not someone that we should leave behind. There should be some definitive answers. I do not believe for 1 minute that Iran does not know exactly the location or whereabouts of Bob Levenson. And, you know, it's sad. I just hope that they're going to still work tirelessly to make sure to bring him home. And the least they could have done as a courtesy to this woman who has grieved and hurt so much for the loss of her husband and where he is, and for information about him, at least pick up the phone and give her a call and give her a heads up and let her know that this was happening, that these other individuals were being released, and maybe assure her, give her some comfort in this time to say, we haven't forgotten about Bob, and we're going to try and bring him home.
Yeah, it seems like the least that she would deserve. Okay, Eric, I want to get your take on this. We're going to take it around the table. The Republicans, of course, had to comment on this. They had the opportunity to, and here's some sound from them.
3 people have just been kidnapped in Iraq, because they see, what the heck, we pay $150 billion for 4 people, 3 people just this morning, and this is going to take place all over. They should have come back as part of the deal 3 years ago when they started talking about the deal, not now.
What the president's now doing, not just with this, but what he did with the Castro brothers and what he did with Bergdahl, is he's put a price on the head of every American abroad. Our enemies now know that if you can capture an American, you can get something meaningful in exchange for it.
This deal is a really problematic deal, and it reflects a pattern we've seen in the Obama administration over and over again of negotiating with terrorists and making deals and trades that endanger U.S. safety and security.
All right, Eric, we'll go to you first. So your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so you really have to look at this. So do you want to put the names of Bob Levenson and frankly, all the hostages that Iran is holding in front of the deal? And if you do, when the deal comes through, you're going to say you've negotiated for these hostages, and therefore doing what Rubio, Trump, and I'm not sure where Cruz was on that, but at least 2 of them were saying, don't you but both of those, I think, have also suggested we do put the names, negotiate in front of the deal, but aren't you doing exactly what you don't want to do by putting a price? No, you say there's no negotiation. Say, hey, listen, you want to play ball, you want to sit at the table with me? These are my unconditional terms. They will be released, and then I will sit at the table with you at this time. I don't disagree with you, but that's not what they were saying. These people have all said, all the candidates have said, you need to get at least tie the release of your people to this deal if you're going to give them a deal. And I agree with you. I think that's a mistake. Make sure you go hardball on them first, get your people back, and then we'll sit down and make. But they're not saying that. That was my point about responding to the Republicans. So for Levenson not being in that group was because if you put him in the group, then are you saying we're going to negotiate, which I think they did do, Obama did do with Cuba. You got the return, the sanctions being dropped with Cuba were dependent upon getting back our American that was being held in Cuba.
And they were just showing you the last proof of life photo of him, because there has been a lack of information forthcoming for quite some time about his whereabouts. Yeah, it's very.
All right, what about you on the Republican response?
I don't know. Can I stick it just to Kerry for a minute when he said that this made a safer place for America? There's no proof of that, because this does not cause any reduction in our most pressing threat, which is the exported suicidal jihadism. And every time, for some reason, that when it comes to defending our country, so many things are off the table. We'll be willing to close Gitmo or end waterboarding, and we'll even refrain from harsh rhetoric. But when it comes to dealing with an adversary, everything is on the table. You know, which is why for Iran it pays to sit back and watch, because you don't have to do anything. You're playing against the world's worst poker table. President Obama, because he's beholden to his legacy, he wants a Reagan-esque moment in foreign policy, that he will trade the White House for a bag of marbles.
All right, so here's the other point of view, which is that we just had a group of sailors stray into Iranian waters. They were gone out in 24 hours. Now, that suggests that there are open lines of communication that previously didn't exist. And you know what?
You know that Kerry didn't know anything about half of that.
And you know what? It was a good outcome for America. That's a good outcome to get our military people back.
Why did they take him to begin with?
What?
Yes,
they strayed into sovereign waters.
You just reward the terrorists. You're like,
but they went into sovereign waters. I'm just saying, if Iranian forces wandered into American waters, you think we'd let them go like that?
They didn't have to take them to begin with. You could say, listen, you've strayed. Okay, obviously this was a mistake. You don't have to go and capture, make a big.
You don't think, Juan, that whole exercise was for propaganda?
Well, yeah. Once they had them, of course they did tell. But I'm saying our people were out within 24 hours. That's good news.
Kerry was very disappointed by
the second thing I would say is I noticed at this table, Gregory, a slightly subdued tone this Monday afternoon. And I think that you saw it from those Republican candidates, folks. They just, you know what, this was a good deal, and they don't want to say it. They don't want to say, Obama, you did good this time. We got our people back, and we got a deal to keep those bad guys away from nukes.
Do that, because that is not the case on any one of the Republicans across the board unequivocally. And there's not one that thinks this is a good idea.
No,
it's ridiculous that you would say that about any of them.
Well, Cruz said, actually, Cruz started out by saying this is good news.
You know what? You can be glad that the people got home, and still be skeptical about the deal and its long-term consequences.
Juan's listening to the rhetoric on mute, so he's like, what, fuzza wuzza, can't hear what's going on. What I do know is that American citizens and American soldiers have now become the biggest Powerball for terrorists throughout the world. Pick one, win big.
And we're going to leave it there. Did any of you catch the Democrat